ظلمو یہ علم از ابو فاضل مدد مدد
خدا را شکر خدا را شکر حسین جانم تو را دارم حسین جانم براه تو سرو جانم بود حاضر کہ عشق تو بہر منزل مرا ہمدم مرا ناصر تو ہی دینا تو ہی مانا حسین جانم تو را دارا لہو بہتا ہے بہنے دو کہ جا جاتی ہے جانے دو چراغ ظلم گر ظالم جلاتا ہے جلانے دو بجھائیں گے لہو سے حسین جانا تو را دارا نغاف کثرت دشمن نبی میں بے کسی درد ہمیں دانا
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الأول بلا أول كان قبله والآخر بلا آخر يكون بعده الذي قصرت عن رؤيته أبصار الناظرين وعجزت عن نعته أوهام الواصفين ابتدع بقدرته الخلق ابتداعا واخترعهم على مشيته اختراعا ثم سلك بهم طريق إرادته وبعثهم في سبيل محبته لا يملكون تأخيرا عما قدمهم إليه ولا يستطيعون تقدما إلى ما أخرهم عنه تقدست أسماؤه وتظاهرت آلاؤه لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون ثم شرائف صلواته ونوامي بركاته على عبده ورسوله الخاتم لما سبق والفاتح لمن غلق والمعلن الحق بالحق الدافع جيشات الأباطيل والدامغ صولات الأطاليل العبد المؤيد والمنصور المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد الذي بلغ الرسالة صادعا بها وحمل على المحجة دالا عليها وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا ولا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين وحجته في العالمين روحي وأرواح العالمين لتراب مقدمه فداء واللعن الدائم على أعدائهم وغاصبي حقوقهم وجاحدي مناقبهم ومنكري فضائلهم من الآن إلى أبد العابدين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أم لهم شركاء شرعوا لهم من الدين ما لم يأذن به الله ولولا كلمة الفصل لقضي بينهم وإن الظالمين لهم عذاب أليم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم الشريف. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. May Allah bless you and keep you well, and may He give you the capacity and the ability to remember Al-Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam in this month especially, in our lifetimes always. And may He give us the tears and the capacity to grieve and to remember that Imam alayhi salatu wassalam, whose love is our iman, whose love is our faith, and devotion to him constitutes our path in life. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. The topic of the discussion that I've chosen, and I believe is very important and critical, is the question of taqlid. Obviously, taqlid is a very important matter in the lives of Shia, as individual beings, and as a society, as a community. Taqlid determines the direction that our community is going towards. Taqlid determines how we pray, how we perform our religious duties, each one of us, for those of us who uphold taqlid, who observe taqlid. And that is the majority of Shia. Therefore, a close look, a close analysis, an unbiased study of the subject of taqlid and what a taqlid is and what its real practice and real life means, and also what are its justifications, what are the arguments that substantiate the validity of taqlid, is very necessary. And inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, I'll try to be subjective and I'll try to be unbiased, and I will try to present to you the proofs of both sides, the arguments of both sides. Those who suggest taqlid is a valid method of reaching and acquiring knowledge of duties that are incumbent upon every Shia, and those who reject taqlid. And inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, once you have seen, once you've observed the proofs of taqlid and the arguments of taqlid, then inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, it will be very easy for you to make up your mind and determine whether taqlid is truly an Islamic way, a valid way, a legitimate way to reach one's duties, or it is not. The subject of taqlid, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, when we present this taqlid, it does not mean in any way, and perhaps many of you know my position, that I reject personally taqlid. But inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, it will be my objective and my desire not to let my personal views get in the way of presenting the proofs of both sides in a very scholarly and academic and unbiased fashion. On any given matter, especially matters of religion, every person, most people have views. And if a person has views which favors one side of the subject, should not be allowed to speak about that subject, then nobody could talk about almost any subject in religion, and especially those who propose taqlid, those who promote taqlid, they should not be allowed to discuss taqlid also. Uh, when we present the subject of taqlid, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, at the end, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, you will see that you will find many things that now you will, now that perhaps most of you, those of you who have not studied my articles or have listened to my lectures in other languages with regard to taqlid, that you would be shocked to find, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, and you would be totally, totally surprised that all this information was hidden from you and they were not revealed to you. And at that time, inshallah, there are important things that I'll have to discuss, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, with you, and it will be premature to bring them up now. So when we start the discussion of any matter, it is very, very important that we establish the zone of conflict, that we define that matter which is disputed, that we define it as precisely and as concisely as we can, so we have an understanding, a good understanding that what we are talking about. And there is a very wide, very prevalent confusion with regard to taqlid, what taqlid is. Although most of you know what taqlid is, however, especially so in the cases of Shia scholars. When I say Shia scholars, I mean people who have gone to the Hawza and they have studied in the clerical establishment, either Qom or Najaf or other centers of learning, and they have returned to their communities with a certain level of learning that they have acquired at those centers. There's a great amount of confusion with regard to taqlid, especially in the parlance and the language of the clerics, that you have to be very beware, you have to be very cognizant of. And if you do not pay attention, then you will remain in that confusion yourself. So therefore, it's very important for us to define taqlid and to retain, and then retain that definition of what taqlid is in our minds throughout this discussion. Taqlid, commonly, if you refer to the scholars and deliberate with the scholars and consult with them, when I say scholars, again, scholars of the Hawza, scholars, Shia clergy, who are very adamant about defending taqlid and promoting taqlid. And obviously, any person who questions taqlid, he is either regarded as a fool, as a person who's stupid, or a person who is paid off by the enemies of Shi'ism. And let me refer to this matter, also address this matter, that regardless of the fact whether the person who is objecting on the institution of taqlid and person who is questioning the legitimacy of taqlid, regardless whether he's a fool or they call him a fool, or there's a suspicion of him having an agenda, a discrete agenda, perhaps supported by enemies of Shi'ism. This does not negate the fact that it is necessary for us as Shia to study taqlid and to really, we as Shias of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam, as followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam, to understand whether truly is this something that was promoted by Imams alayhim as-salatu was-salam and advised by the Imams alayhim as-salatu was-salam and recommended by the holy beings salamullahi alayhim as a pathway for the Shia to gain knowledge of their duties. So just to allege a person who is questioning taqlid that he is a fool or he's stupid, or to question his motives, this still does not disallow us from studying this matter, because even fools have to be responded to. Even people who have discrete agendas, they need to be responded, because they cast doubts in the hearts of Shia, and these doubts have to be answered. And just to allege them that they're paid off by enemies of Shi'ism, that is not sufficient of an answer on the question. So what is taqlid? That is very important. At the outset, we have to define what is taqlid, and you have to retain that meaning of taqlid throughout this discussion in your minds. Commonly, when you refer to scholars and consult with the people who have learned in the houses or whose knowledge come from the houses, they would say taqlid is the consultation of the unlearned with the learned. When an unlearned person deliberates and refers to a jurist or a person who has knowledge of, or is a representative of a jurist, such a matter is taqlid. However, this is not true. You have to remember this. Any discussion of a matter with an alim, with a scholar, religious scholar, is not taqlid. Taqlid is very specific. And that specific matter has been questioned and rejected by towering figures of Shia sciences of religion. And we have to retain that in mind, because nobody in his right mind can be against the act of deliberation of an unlearned person, but a person who is learned. What do we mean by an act of deliberation of an unlearned with the learned? We mean when a person who is unlearned, a person who is a layman, who does not have in-depth knowledge of Islamic sciences, he refers to, he goes to, he calls, he visits a person who knows these matters, who is generally called a scholar. And such a person would explain to him on the questions regarding tafsir, regarding hadith, regarding belief systems, particular items in belief systems, and with regard to halal and haram, those rulings that pertain to our action, our activities in Islam. So no person could be against that, because there is no other way of us Shi'a, common Shi'a, of us gaining knowledge of how we are going to act, how we are going to perform, we are going to pray, how we are going to go to Hajj and perform and carry out the rituals of Hajj, and how we are going to get married, and how we are going to do nikah, and how we are going to do talaq, and how we are going to pay our religious dues, and how we are going to fast, and what are all the particular rulings with regard to salah, with regard to prayer. So all of these need to be explained. We have to learn from some source. So nobody in his right mind could deny that a person who is not learned, a person who is layman, he needs to refer to someone who is learned. So what is taqlid? We have to understand, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, that the definition of taqlid that I am going to present to you is not my definition. Once this is presented to you, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, you will understand that this is the essence of taqlid, and that is taqlid, because most of you know what taqlid is. And I'm going to present to you from sources of the mujtahideen. When I say mujtahideen, people who follow the methodology of ijtihad. And one matter that I have to address to is, if we were to pursue these topics in a very academic fashion, it would have been necessary, or it would have been at least commendable in some ways, to present the discussions of ijtihad before the discussions of taqlid. However, I'm afraid that if I do that, inshallah, I don't know, perhaps I won't have enough time in the future to completely present to you my inquiries and my research into ijtihad, and then also be able to have sufficient time to present to you my perspectives with regard to taqlid. Therefore, I'm presenting to you taqlid first, and that is because taqlid is something that you deal with in your daily lives. So what is taqlid? Taqlid is that when a layman, or al-ammi, layman, a common person, takes the word of a mujtahid, the opinion of a mujtahid, the verdict of a mujtahid, the fatwa of a mujtahid, and without knowing whether it corresponds, this specific fatwa corresponds to the sayings of Imam alayhi salam, or a verse of the Noble Quran, or whatever reasoning and proof and argument that mujtahid substantiates his verdict without knowledge of that, and takes that verdict and acts upon it, that is taqlid. So, a mujtahid, when he gives a fatwa, when he expresses his opinion on any subject, he has an argument that substantiates. Whether that argument is right or wrong, that's something else, but he has something. He has a hadith or sets of hadith. He has a verse of the Noble Quran, or more than one verse of the Noble Quran, or some other rationalization that justifies that substantiates his verdict. So, and then he issues his verdict. Then he issues his opinion, his legal opinion. That, for instance, that when you do masah on your head, you can do masah with 3 fingers or 2 fingers or even 1 finger, or that you, even if you do 1 inch of masah, that's sufficient for masah. Or any other subject, or how to wash your face during wudu, or how to do what words of prayers and supplication are recommended to be said when you're in sajda. Any subject that when he gives a fatwa, he must have something. However, you as a muqallid, you as a person who is following him in taqlid, you do not know the specific reasons why that mujtahid is giving those fatwa. You think, you believe that he has some justifications. However, you do not know them. This is taqlid. So taqlid is to take the verdict of the mujtahid and regard that verdict of mujtahid as Islamically valid. You have a divine mandate, you have a legality, you have a validity, that if you conform to that verdict, if you obey and observe and carry out that verdict, then Allah Ta'ala, you have performed the duty that was obliged upon you by Allah. Because the general understanding of the Shia is that the marja, he is the deputy of the Imam alayhi salatu wassalam, and his words are compulsory to be followed, mandatory to be followed. And once you follow the words of the mujtahid, then you have carried out your duty, and then you will not be on the day of judgment. You will not, even if those words of the mujtahid were not correct. Mujtahid had committed an error in his judgment, in his deductions, in his calculations. Even in that case, you will not be held responsible. For instance, let's give it an example from this dunya. If you lived in the times of kings, if a king told you that such a person is my deputy, and you carry out the actions, whatever he tells you, you do it. And whatever he tells you not to do, not do it. Or if you're working for a company and the president of the company says this person is your boss, and you have to do whatever he says you to carry out. And if he says do not do, don't do it. So in such a case, whether the case of a king or the CEO of a company, then you have no other duty just to listen to your boss, to listen to your Lord. Whatever he says to do it, you do that. And when he says jump, you jump. When he says don't jump, you do not jump. And if you have a doubt whether this person really is commanding you according to the wishes of the king, you do not worry about that. Why? Because the king himself told you, or the CEO himself told you. Whatever he says, do it. So that is the general understanding of the Shia with regard to mujtahideen, with regard to maraja. That a marja is the deputy of the Imam alayhi salam. And when he says something to do it, it's his deputy, the representative of the Imam alayhi salam has said so. Therefore, you do it. And you do not have any other duty beyond that to do research. Why the mujtahids give such a command, such verdict. And generally, Shias assume that mujtahids have tremendous amount of knowledge, and those discussions of how a mujtahid comes to particular verdict, they are very abstruse, they are very complex, they are very difficult to understand. So even if we try to understand, we will not be able to understand those complex debates and discussions. Therefore, let's not bother with understanding what are the reasons of mujtahid for issuing a particular fatwa. As long as we carry out those fatwa, we have absolved ourselves from any divine punishment of the day on the day of judgment. So that is taqlid, my dear brethren. Taqlid, therefore, taqlid is to act according to the verdicts of mujtahid without knowing the justification of those verdicts. But in case you know the justification, then you're not doing taqlid. For instance, if a mujtahid told you do such and such a thing, and you know that's true, and you know because you know all the ahadith on that subject, because before them even you met the mujtahid, or before even you followed the mujtahid, you read the books of hadith. You saw one hadith, two hadith, three hadith, four hadith, five hadith, 7, 10 hadith. They also tell you. For instance, you went to an alim and you told him, my dear scholar, my respected scholar, I want you to translate to me honestly and with great accuracy the hadith with regard to wudu, for instance. How do we wash our face and our hands and do masah of the head and the feet according to Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam? And he read to you the hadith, 1 hadith, 2 hadith, 3 hadith, 10 ahadith from Imams alayhim wassalatu wasalam. This is how the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam used to do wudu. This is how Amirul Mu'minin alayhi salam. This is how Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, Aimma alayhi salam, they all did the same way. And you understood that this is the way to do wudu. And then you went and recited the verses of wudu in the Noble Quran. And the scholar explained that to you also. And this is not impossible, something like to on a certain subject to read 10, 20 hadith. That is doable for many people. Although there is general understanding amongst Shi'a, layman Shi'a, that's impossible. But let's assume that you were able to. Let's assume that you had studied in Hausa for a while, for instance. You studied in the Hausa. You are not
هرگز نهراسد شده کین دشمن دین ما تحت
हुसैन जाना बराहे तू सरोज
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My apologies to you. There was something here in technical with one of my equipment. It killed my voice. So that was this is embarrassing. I didn't even realize my audio was cut off. So I think I'm going to have to redo this lecture from the beginning because this is not going to work. This video, I don't know where I got cut off, and to resume from where I got cut off would maybe what I'm going to do is just start another stream, so that way what do you suggest? Should I start another stream that way to end this stream on YouTube? So if I start a new stream, the benefit of that will be then it will be complete for later. Okay. So I'm going to end this stream. I'm going to restart another stream, inshallah, tabaraka wa ta'ala. Or we just do this tomorrow? I'll just start another stream. Just allow me, I'll return. I'll end this stream and I'll start another stream, okay?